This morning I want to start out with something that I call the not self.
Sorry?
The not self.
The not self.
Yeah. Sometimes people say I'm not blah, blah, blah. I'm not mean. I'm not, yeah. So, or I'm not the kind of person who. Now, negation takes many forms, and negation is always a little weird to talk about. Hard not to talk about negation. If you think of yourself as mean and you don't like it, that's still a positive, you have a positive representation of what meanness is. You have images of what it would be like to be mean. But if you say, I'm not mean, it's a different kind of negation. And what I'd like you all to do is have some experience of this internally before we discuss it externally. It's, I think I'll do it differently than I usually do. First, think of something that you're not that you approve of, that you value. Yeah, think of something that you're not, that if you had it, you would like it. And just think about that, and what is that like, and what is your internal experience of that? I'm not successful, or brilliant, or whatever it is, intelligent.
Coming here, I was thinking this.
I mean, even if you don't really believe that, Jackie says, is that what you're suggesting, or you mean?
On the last day, Steve.
What is that?
All things for breakfast.
Too many people are talking at once. I don't know. Let me go on a little bit and see if I can clarify. Evidently, I need to clarify. If I go, I'm not rich. I'm not anything. But it's something that you would, if you were, you would value it. You would think it was worthwhile. Just go inside, and what is that like? What response do you have to thinking of something that you're not, that you value? So what is it like to think of yourself as not something that you value? Yeah.
I think of this value as if it is unreachable. It's something away from me.
Okay. So it's something out away from you, unreachable. Okay. Somebody else. Because there's basically two possibilities.
Sometimes remains dissociated.
It remains dissociated. Yeah, it's separate from you, right? I'm not that. It's out away from you. Mm-hmm. And what is your response to its being away from you?
I could put it in it.
Okay. So you could
Put it
either go there or bring it
put
to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
There is possibility.
Yeah. It hinges on whether you think it's possible or not. Right? Because if you think it's not possible to have it, then you probably get depressed or feel bad in some way, right? Depression is too specific, but it would lead to feeling not nice feelings. But if you think it's possible for you, then it'd be motivating, right?
Yeah.
Then you'd be drawn toward it, or you'd be reaching for it, or trying to go for it, right? So thinking in terms of something not that is valuable, if you think it's possible, then it would motivate you. And this is one of the reasons why when people do workshops that basically say you can do anything, can really transform people. Because if they have a bunch of things that they thought were impossible, and you create in them the belief that these are possible for you, like with a fire walk or something like that. You know, if you can walk across fire, you can do anything.
Right.
Now, whether that's true or not, I don't care. But if you can build that belief in someone, then it unleashes a whole bunch of motivation. That a whole bunch of things that they've just gone, oh, I'll never be that. You know, I can never do that. then suddenly, hey, I can be that, woo! And then suddenly people can get very, very motivated. Any questions about this? This one's pretty simple. Then I'll go to the more difficult one.
Well, the way something like the firewalk works, surely, is through the capability change. You now know that on the capability level you've got that, and that produces the belief change.
Yeah, it's a belief change, sure. Yep.
Or not.
Well, it's a belief in possibility. And, you know, sometimes it's not a useful belief. Sometimes people think they can do anything and they can't yet, at least yet. What is it?
My son's snowboarding. I couldn't look at him when he was going down the slope.
Oh, snowboarding. Well, he was doing all right, though, right? You were doing not so good. Okay. Yeah, sometimes people have, I mentioned, you know, the competence-confidence thing. Sometimes people go through the firewalk and they get an enormous amount of confidence, but no additional competence. And that can be a problem. But for people who are competent or have some way of developing competence, changing that belief in that they can do something can be really releasing, can be really wonderful for them, because they can do all kinds of things that before they didn't even try, and they actually could do them or they could learn to do them. Really, the best kind of belief is the kind that is that builds an analog direction. I can learn to become. I can learn the skills to do whatever it is, rather than I am. Somebody suddenly thinks they are rich and they aren't yet. That might be a problem, because they really don't have anything more in their wallet, but they now act rich and buy lots and lots of things or something, and then get into trouble that way. Okay, this one's pretty simple, and then I'll go to the more interesting one. Any other questions on this? Mm-hmm.
There are something that we don't have, and we can, like learning, I can learn to do a sport or
Mm-hmm.
something. But there is something like, I'm not lucky.
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 Okay.
So, how would I be lucky?
Well, luck is an interesting one. They've actually done some research on this, and people who think they're lucky become more lucky. They actually become lucky. Yeah. This would be a good one to build if you don't have it already. Not that kind of luck.
No.
No. Not that kind. Not the luck that comes out of randomness, but the kind of luck that, what is it? Chance favors the prepared mind. That's can't think of the name of the guy who discovered bugs, the first guy who discovered bugs. Pasteur, Louis Pasteur. He says, chance favors only the prepared mind. If you think of yourself as lucky, you preset your mind to take advantage of opportunities that present themselves. And I don't mean gambling is not what I'm talking about at all. I'm talking about the kind of thing that if you feel lucky, you're on the outlook for opportunity. And when an opportunity comes, you're more likely to notice it. And people who feel unlucky tend not to notice it. So you can literally build yourself, just as we were doing yesterday, build yourself a part of your self-concept that you are a lucky person. And think of it out of your conception was an immensely lucky thing. Just in terms of one intercourse, there's about 200 million sperm, and one got there, and that became you. 200 million, roughly. Now, of course, not every intercourse results in a conception. So the chances are really much, much huger. The chances of you even being here at all are very, very tiny. In every generation, about 15% of people do not reproduce, 15 to 20%. Now, if you take that over the hundreds and hundreds of generations of the last 100,000 years, the chances of your parents, and your grandparents, and your great-grandparents, and all of those surviving to reproduce is tiny. mean, you can, and just on a personal level, you can think of all sorts of evidence for being lucky. All the things, just think of all the times in your life when someone just handed you something, or some opportunity opened up, or you just missed being killed by a careening bus, or, you know, all of those experiences. If you assemble all those and put them all together. Some years ago, I was going to see a friend in Northern California. I was on a trip, and I was driving around this road in the rain in the winter, and as I rounded a bend, ahead of me was a log about this big, right across the road, and the branches were still jiggling. It had just fallen, just came over, and the roots were still popping out of the ground. You hear this snap, pop, this strain, pop the roots in, you know. If I'd been 10, 13 seconds ahead of where I was, it would have come right down in the car. Now, there's a bunch of those that you can recognize as being, you know, escaping death by a very short, small margin. But think of all the ones you never even thought about. You took a little different route to town and there was a big accident over here. And usually you would go that way. You never found out about it. So there's got to be lots and lots of those that you never even think about, you never even notice. So building a sense of being lucky can be very useful. Not luck in the gambling thing. That's a...
You never know. Maybe it attracts. Luck attracts luck.
I don't think so.
This guy's lost a lot of money, and he thinks he's lucky. Oh, yeah.
You see, so we still have this conviction.
Yeah, that's the problem, though.
Yes.
He makes a lot of money, so he spends a lot of money. That's just all there is to it.
Yeah. Well, maybe he's lucky elsewhere in his business or something. Yeah. Yeah, that's more of a compulsion thing. But the sense of feeling lucky and being able to notice opportunities and take advantage of opportunities, that really does work. Otherwise, you'd be blind to them. You're kind of staring at the floor and all these wonderful things are happening and that you can take advantage of and you don't even notice them. Okay, let's go now to thinking of yourself as not something that you don't like. Like, I'm not cruel, or I'm not nasty, or something like that. Something that you don't value. Think about not being that kind of person. And just kind of go inside and imagine that you had a database of not. I am not cruel. I'm going to use cruel just because it's hard to talk. I need to use some kind of content. You can use anything else you want. I'm just going to use cruel as a kind of a code word. And you can think of anything you want in there. And as I discuss it, I'm going to use the word cruel. Now, if you, in language, not cruel and kind could be the same meaning, right? But in experience, they're pretty different. If you go, I'm kind, you can make a database of being kind. If you're not cruel, take a look inside. What kind of database do you build if you're not cruel? Now, you could do the linguistic transformation and go from not cruel to kind, and then build a database of being kind. But if you stay with not cruel, what kind of a database do you build? And what would it be like to live with that? How would you respond? What is it like to be not cruel, or not anything else that you don't like? Okay, noticing all the times that you could be, that's one possibility. Okay.
Choosing not to be.
Okay. So you'd have to go through a process. Remember, these things are targets, right?
Yeah.
These lead your behavior.
That's right.
These draw you toward them.
You have to focus on the cruelty.
You would have to focus on cruelty. Yeah. So what is that experience like? Give me some more details.
It's almost like you could run two scenarios. First one, you are cruel, and the second one, you're not cruel.
Okay. So you could have a sequential thing of going into the cruelty and then stopping and coming back and
redoing it in a way that you're not that.
Okay. Which is a little awkward, isn't it?
It is. It's very difficult.
It's like these like these no right turn signs. You know, there's this thing that goes like this, and then there's the red circle. This arrow tends to be compelling. It tends to go, oh, okay, turn right, and then you have to cancel it out, which is really awkward. I'd like to get a hold of the guy who invented that signing system. Because, you know, it would be so easy. If it's no right turn, then you could have an arrow that goes straight and an arrow that goes left. Instead of this one, you know? And think about it. If someone's in an emergency situation and they have to respond really, really quickly, how are they going to respond to an arrow with a red circle around it? Some of them may do the wrong thing because it's more immediate. It's following the more unconscious kind of processing. Arrow's very simple. Go that way. And then you have to cancel it, which takes a little more time, takes a little more brain power. In an emergency situation, people often don't have much brain power. So tell me more of what it's like to be not something that you disvalue, or you don't value.
My mind is divided. One road is bright,
Okay?
and the other is just like round and black.
Okay.
And I'm searching, and that's it.
What is it?
And that's it. I
Oh, that's
couldn't
it.
find anything
Okay, you couldn't find anything in the black.
black.
Okay. Now this is a little metaphorical, a little bit abstract. Can you concretize it a little bit? Like what is it in the black, or what is the bright road? Anybody else while she's thinking?
See a lot of examples of other people,
Doing cruel things?
to do cruel things.
Okay.
In a lot of those examples. And
Okay.
those
And what's it like to live in there with all these pictures of being cruel? Either yourself being cruel, the things that you could do being cruel, or other people being cruel. What's it like?
I want to avoid it, I'm not going to go anything bad.
Yeah, you want to draw away
Settle-
from it, right? You want
settle
to
it.
pull back.
Yeah.
Imagine that you lived in this room all your life, and around all the walls were pictures of disaster and cruelty.
I dissociate.
That wouldn't be much fun, would it?
It's like when I watch a movie at nighttime or even see the news, I'll read something else that's pleasant before I go to bed, so that's not.
Get something else in your mind, huh?
Get something else there.
Yeah, absolutely.
in mind before.
Yeah, the other way is to kind of wash your mind out after television. I kind of imagine, you know, pouring water in the top of my head, and it just washes all those pictures out. I only watch television about once a year.
When is that?
Usually when I'm up here, because there's a television in the room, and I'm a little tired and I don't have anything else to do, so I commit television for an hour just to kind of see what everybody else is watching. It's pretty scary, especially after you haven't looked at it for a year. You get used to it, you know. You get used to anything. You get used to your own language, your own culture, or whatever, and then when you encounter something significantly different, it's really, wow, what's that? So, let's go a little further with this. So, in your internal experience, if I'm not cruel, I see pictures of cruelty. It might be myself, things that I could be cruel, might be other people being cruel, and so on. It's what I don't value, so I draw back from it. But remember, these things tend to, your internal databases are what direct your behavior. And remember, the unconscious doesn't process negation. So what result will this have in terms of conscious processing versus unconscious processing? If I say I'm not cruel, and I have an internal database of cruelty, unconsciously, I'll tend to go to cruelty. Consciously, I'll think I'm not cruel. Now that creates a very interesting separation between conscious and unconscious processing. My conscious experience, I'm not cruel. Unconsciously, what will I actually do? I will tend to be. Yeah, I'll tend to be cruel and do things that are mean. And this is a very, very strange kind of thing. It's a disunity or a separation between conscious and unconscious. Now, what if your whole life was this way? Let's say that let's take this to the extreme, that all your self-definition was in terms of what you're not. I'm not cruel, I'm not stupid, I'm not da-da-da. Everything is in terms of not. Try that on. A little spooky, but try it on because, and I don't recommend this as a general thing, but to try it on just to experience what it would be like to have this can really make it useful in understanding people who do this, because there are people who do this. I'm not a terrorist, I'm not a communist, I'm not a whatever.
There's too many things to think about, I think, as well.
Well, there's a lot of things to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like we're being almost cornered.
Cornered, surrounded, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sucked into something. What are you being sucked into? Okay, so you mean being drawn to all these things that you don't like. Okay, good. What's that?
I was just going, I can see why people with like high blood pressure and stress, and it just, my
Yeah.
heart just started going.
It would be stressful, wouldn't it? Because there's all this stuff around you, right, that you don't like.
Almost immediately when thinking of the map, I see just a negative, a film negative.
Okay.
Instead of seeing a nice, clear, color picture of myself or surrounding circumstances, whatever,
Okay.
I just see this sort of a negative type thing there. It doesn't even, it just represents a human shape, and then the rest is just kind of fuzzy, black and grayish.
Okay. Okay. Now, if all your self-definition was in terms of what you're not, who are you? Would you have any sense of self?
No.
There'd be a big emptiness, wouldn't there? Because you don't know who you are, you only know who you're not. This is in the extreme, of course, and just for teaching purposes. You wouldn't have any sense of who you were. Now, if you don't have any sense of who you are, how could you get some sense of who you are?
By not being that way.
That's going to be even deeper into the hole. Don't not.
Yeah.
By finding the opposite, if you like, or what it is you do want, as opposed to this, putting it into the well-formed outcome.
That's the way out. But a lot of people don't find the way out. As you know, many people come in and they want help and they only know what they don't want, right? So I agree with you, but most people don't find that. Now let's assume for the moment that people don't find that they are just trapped in this world where they only know what they're not and they don't know what they are. How could you get some sense of self? Kind of put yourself in that situation.
It's almost
By
like
doing what you don't want to do.
What's that?
maybe some kind of polarity thing, pushing against, pushing away from, or something. I'm not sure.
Well, you're pulling away from or pushing away these images of what you're not. So you know what you're against.
Right.
You know what you don't want, but you don't know who you are. How could you get some sense of identity?
By becoming what you don't want to be.
Well, that would be one way. One way would be to become what you don't want and have some sense of identity.
Just taking on what is offered. I mean, the media offer enough pictures of self, just taking on them, consuming what is propagated, and by consuming, getting a feel of, I get close to that picture.
Okay, some kind of vicarious identity,
Yeah.
like identifying with something outside.
Yeah.
Well, but see, that would be saying I am this. That would be identifying in a more positive way. I mean, not positive in the sense of valuable or not, but that if I go, you know, I am like this football star, or I am like this beautiful model, or whatever it is, that would be more of a positive kind of identity. I am something. But if you stay with the I'm not,
It's
how
almost
could...
like the opposition becomes your identity.
Yeah,
Always opposed.
right. And then you could get together with other people who are also opposing things, right? And get some sense of opposition, of identity from joining with others who are also against things.
Right.
Okay? Got it?
It's one of the difficulties with trying to make change, I think, is where a protest movement knows what it doesn't want.
Yes,
And the problem can really arise when it's not exactly sure what it does want.
absolutely. Same kind of process. You know what you're against, you can get angry. There's all these terrible things happening in the world, and you have all these images that you're against and so on, and you can get very, very angry. But there's no positive thing to go toward. Right.
Or it seems so distant, it's not well formed in any way.
Yeah. Don't know what they're for, and often they end up doing the same thing as what they're against. You ever notice that? Yeah. They're against intolerance, and they become very intolerant about intolerance. Okay, and there are many, many examples like that. Okay.
Getting specific at the behavior level,
And
just noticing what you actually are doing. And kind of like the examples and counterexamples. You begin to notice that.
okay, but what you are doing is being against something. So it's still a negation.
I'm talking about your actual behavior.
Okay.
If you think of yourself as not cruel,
Yeah.
and then you start to notice your actual behavior, probably you'll have counterexamples. Probably you'll have times when you were actually kind.
Right. But if you have a database that's pure, you won't notice them. Now, I agree it's a possibility. It's a possibility. But I want to take this to the extreme because it's kind of interesting to play this little mind game in you. Let me give you an example. When my youngest son was in the 9th grade, I took a group of kids off to a kind of a weekend camp that they were going to be at. And there were 4 kids in the car. 2 of them were in the cool group. You know, we're cool, we're hot, we're special. And they kept talking almost nonstop. The little snippets of television, movies and so on, little snippets of news, little stuff about the trip they were going on and so on. And it took me a while, but I finally realized they were disdaining everything. They were putting everything down. They were sneering, scornful of almost everything they talked about. It's the same process. They gained some kind of identity by joining with others who did the same thing, who scorned. And there was nothing in there about what they were for. It was only what they were not. Same process. Now, they weren't totally nuts or anything, but they were headed in a direction that I think is not useful. Now, what would a psychiatrist call this? You going away from things? Well, it's more than oppositional. I mean, people can be oppositional and have a pretty good sense of who they are, as well as what they're not and what they don't like and so on. Anomie. There's an element of that. Anomie, not knowing who you are. But you can be lost and not know who you are without having the against thing. You know, it's kind of like, I don't know who I am. And there is an element of that here. Think about it. I'm against everything. My conscious and my unconscious responses are real separate, which is part of the problem of this noticing your unconscious responses. You're not going to notice because unconsciously I'm not this, and you have this conscious thing that has the negation in it. Unconsciously, you go ahead and do things. Going away from things, angry at things. All these terrible people, other people are terrible. Paranoia. Paranoia. No sense of internal self. Paranoid may say that he's, Alexander the Great or Jesus or something like that, but that's like a completely fake, phony cover-up to a terrible sense of emptiness and loneliness and not really being anything. So I'm convinced this is the mechanism by which we all do, to a certain extent, project. We're against something, that we have a representation in our minds. We're against it. I'm not that, and then we will tend to behave in ways that are similar to whatever it is that's represented there. I don't think I'm doing very well.
Obviously, it goes against your values as well, because otherwise you wouldn't
Right,
like it.
right. So it's always against your values. You feel lonely, you feel empty. Paranoia. Yeah.
Spiritual level, they have the reducing the ego, or I'm not this, I'm not that exercise.
Yeah.
Ramana Maharshi, I'm not this, I'm not that.
Oh, uh-huh. Do they get paranoid?
I don't know. But it's supposed to be helping to raise your consciousness in some way to reduce your ego.
Yeah, there's this funny thing about you shouldn't have an ego. If you have a sense of who you are that's unconscious, I don't think it's a problem. If you have a sense of yourself that's very conscious, I do think it's a problem. And I think a lot of spiritual teachers, throughout a long, thousands of years have said, it'd be better if you didn't have a sense of self. I think that means that you shouldn't have a sense of conscious self. And I agree that gets in the way. Unfortunately, if you go, you shouldn't have a sense of self, that adds another negation. And actually, this teaching is there a lot of places too, that if you struggle against the ego, it just makes the ego stronger. Because who's struggling? Ego, or I, the sense of self. So if you struggle against the sense of self, it just makes it doubly powerful. It just increases it. I think they pointed out a problem, but I don't think their solution works very well. I agree with the goal, but not the method. Yeah, it's plain. Language is how we communicate with each other, and it's very slippery. And that's of course why we have games like this, where we try and explore these kinds of things. Now, in one sense, if you say, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not this, I'm not everything, then what's left, if you disidentify with everything around you, then if you do it in a certain way, it can be useful. But if you fight against, then it's not good. It's the difference between pushing against and just letting go of something. Because a lot of people are over-identified. People identify with a flag, they identify with their football team, they identify with their local group, their family, you can identify with anything. Now the other way to go is to identify with everything. And personally, I like that better. I am you, and you, and you, and you, and you. And I'm all of you, and I'm this building, and I'm the trees and all the sunshine outside. I'm everything. And this has also been a mystic tradition, to completely identify as a small, tiny, tiny part of this immense universe. So it's not I am the king and I am God and I am all of these wonderful, powerful things. It's like I am all of this. It's another way to go. So that's a little bit of a sideline here. So now there's another interesting possibility that I like to explore, and this is written up better in the book than I can ever say it here because I spent a long time at it. If you disidentify, if you have a sense of yourself as not being something you don't value, and you keep the not stuff outside, you become paranoid. Because if you keep the not, what you are rejecting outside, what if you keep it inside? What if you go, I'm not, and it's perceived as a location inside your skin versus outside your skin? No, well, let me think about it. Maybe I would. In schizophrenia, there's deep incongruities. They're very, very, and there's disorganization. There's fragmentation. But I'm going for something a little different, I think. But you might be right. This is ground where I'm very shaky. But it's fun to explore and pretend and think what might be the case. Yeah, multiple personality disorder. Think about it. The conscious mind is I'm not cruel, I'm not this, that, and the other. The unconscious is going after whatever is represented there because it's not going to negate. And if it's, which is the same thing we've been talking about as paranoia. But paranoid, the not self is out there. If the not self is inside, then it's different. And maybe that's the structure. And maybe that's the structure of multiple personality. Because in multiple personality, and if we take the simplest case of dual personality, and by the way, let me give some background. I don't have a lot of experience with these kind of people, very little in fact, but originally, the first cases of multiple personality were what they called dual personality. And in dual personality, the dominant personality is typically one who's accepted the values of society. They're church-going, they're nice, they don't swear, they're not sexual, they're doing whatever the culture says they should do. And then when the revolt happens and the alternate personality emerges, usually they are the opposite. It's as if they value everything that the dominant personality does not value, or vice versa. And I've really been hoping sometime to find time to get a hold of a true multiple personality, because I think a lot of them aren't, and find out how they think about themselves, what's going on in their brain. Now, you all know about parts and reframing and so on. Many of the multiple personalities that I've seen on TV, not just reenactments, but actual therapy segments with people who are supposedly multiple, it looks like parts to me. And the words that they use, they don't say he, they say I, when they are one of these other parts. I mean, there's just a lot of things that make me think this is an extreme example of parts and not a multiple personality. Now, another piece of background I want to tell you is that once in my life, 30, 35 years ago, I did experience a multiple, and it was spooky. And I'm not easily scared. But I was with this woman who was a friend of mine. I was kind of babysitting her because she was going through a bunch of stress. I was kind of just hanging out with her. And I didn't really know her very well at all. And I kind of looked away for a little while, and then I looked back, and like somebody else was there. It was straight out of The Exorcist, and it was very, very convincing. I mean, it was spooky. And as I say, I'm one of the people who went to The Exorcist, and when when the girl vomits on the priest, I cheered. You know. I couldn't take it seriously. I had a great time. And I had a fun time, too. I got about 30 people around me to do the same thing. Just by generating my behavior, they kind of got the idea. And they had the priest gets all the boils all over his body. He's like, oh, yay! I'm that kind of guy. I kind of cheer for the devil. But this was truly spooky. And later I found out that she had this alternate personality that emerged every day and was writing a book for her. That she would basically trance out, this other thing would, entity would come over and was writing this book. I didn't know that at the time, you know, but it was very, very convincing, very, very spooky, like somebody else was there. So I do believe it exists. It's not like I'm discounting the the possibility of it, but I think it's much rarer than most people think. And a lot of the people who, quote, work with multiple personality disorder, I think are working with parts. They're working with parts that are very dissociated, they're very alienated, but they're not true personality, multiple personality. In multiple personality, it's as if all of these alienated parts are all working together as one other personality. And that's different than just having a bunch of different parts. I mean, many of us have ambiguities. I'd kind of like to do this, but I'd rather do this, and that kind of thing. But it's sort of, it's context dependent, or it's related to individual behaviors or situations. And in multiple personality, it's like all of these are organized so that one half belongs to one personality and one half belongs to the other. And so these are all together and these are all together. Rather than just being, well, there's this ambiguity and there's this ambiguity and there's this ambiguity, and they're all within one personality. So it's a different kind of structure, and I wish I knew more about it. But I've been busy and I haven't taken the time to find a real one that I consider real, and then ask them questions, and then ask the alternate personality questions. So, but that's all speculation. Now, I only want to give you this experience of not self, because some people do have this, or they have an element of it. And if you can understand how it works, I think you can work with it. And you offered the alternative earlier of just going, well, how about the positive? So let's say somebody has a database in here of cruelty. Here's all these things of cruelty. And then they have a big circle around it, or some way of negating it. Maybe they negate it auditorily. However they do it. And you can say, okay, you're not cruel. What are you? The old positive outcome thing. What are you? Oh, well, I'm kind. Okay, what's one of the things you do that's kind? Well, I pet cats. Okay, great. Put a picture of petting a cat in here, and basically go through here and transform all these into examples of kindness. And I think pretty soon after, I haven't done this, but I think pretty soon after a while, their unconscious mind would get the idea and then just go ahead and transform all sorts of things so that they become positive. And there you're not changing the meaning, you're only changing the representation of the meaning. Because not cruel equals kind, at least linguistically. And so it's not like you have to transform one thing into another. You're keeping the same meaning, you're just changing the representation of the meaning. So it should be pretty easy. Unless, of course, the person becomes real paranoid. And if they're really paranoid, then they're hard to deal with. Because you are part of the world that they're fighting against. So how do you pace a paranoid? Can you give me a specific? I haven't seen the movie, so what did he do?
Well, the imaginary squirrels, and so he joined the fellow, and they fired imaginary guns at the imaginary squirrels.
Right. Okay, that little piece. Actually, I did see that movie. What am I thinking of? Well, I lied. I was thinking I hadn't seen it. Okay, yeah. Now that's that's going at hallucinations. Was the guy paranoid? Sort of, somewhat. He had these squirrels who were attacking him and so on. So that's one way, behaviorally. How would you do it linguistically? How would you do it with language?
Create a negative double bind.
And
No,
how would
but
you
you
do
have
that?
to do that.
How would you do that? What you mean, I think what you mean is a therapeutic double bind. A double bind in which they would have to escape. The only escape would be into some kind of health or normal functioning. I got a great example of what you were talking about. Don Jackson, who was the mental health, Mental Research Institute, started the mental research, what is it, in Palo Alto? Can't remember the name of it, Mental Research Institute, MRI. They brought him in to interview a paranoid. And so first he made some general explanation to the group or some little presentation, and then they brought in this paranoid guy. You know, he's in his hospital whites and so on. And the paranoid guy comes in like this, marches into the room like this, and takes a chair over here like this. Sits down like this. And so Don Jackson, he's been sitting over here, and Don Jackson has big hospital key rings. You know, all the rings, keys to the hospital. And so he comes over to this guy and he goes, kneels down before him. And he says, obviously you are God. And since you are God, only you deserve the keys to this hospital. And he put the keys in the guy's lap. And then he said, however, if you are God, you have no need for these keys. And then he just came over here and sat down. And this guy over here, I just heard a description of this. I'm making this up partly, but apparently it kind of went like, he became more and more agitated. And finally, he came on like that, and he goes, man, one of us is crazy. That's a start, isn't it? And essentially, he paced the guy's belief that he was God, and then forced him to encounter an inherent contradiction in that belief system. It's a part of the thing that he created a situation in which everything did not fit. And so he had to kind of come out of it in some way. But let's just say you had a client come in and you'd heard ahead of time they were paranoid. What's one of the first things you could say that would be useful in gaining rapport? It's pretty straightforward, really.
Just find something you distrust on the outside of you.
Okay, you could say, man, I don't trust what's going on out there. Damn CIA and all this stuff. You know, they put little bugs in the ceiling and stuff. I think it's spooky. You could do that. That would be joining them, right? Okay. That's a more direct way.
I'm at a loss.
Don't trust me. You really shouldn't trust me.
Don't flare your response.
Well, it's a pace. They're not going to trust you anyway, right?
Yeah.
So if I tell you not to trust me, paradoxically, I become somewhat at least trustworthy.
It's pretty clever.
It's pretty, I mean, if someone is really mistrustful and you say, don't trust me, imagine you're coming into my office or you're coming into my store or any other context, and you're already mistrusting me, and I say, don't trust me. I might make a mistake. I might do something that'll harm you. And then you can start driving little wedges into their belief system. You go, you know, even though I have your best interest at heart, I still might harm you. Because they think I have bad intent and bad behavior. and you suggest that there's a division there and that I could have good intent and still have bad behavior. You can do the flip side. You know, I might intend to harm you and actually do something that would benefit you. And so it starts to loosen up this monolithic thing that's so rock hard and solid. Now, the main point is, if you can get inside the mind of a paranoid, as I've been sort of inviting you to do here, then you can start figuring out how you could deal with it and what you could do. Otherwise, you're really stuck. And typically, paranoids are very bright, they're very intelligent, and often very hard to deal with. Richard and John dealt with a paranoid once, and he came in the door and said, "Stop! Don't say a thing. The place may be bugged." And they went on from there. It's another guy I know worked with a paranoid. The paranoid came in and started telling him all this stuff, and he says, "Oh my God, you took a huge chance in coming here. Do you realize that I could be part of this whole situation and there could be bugs in the ceiling and doing like this? You've got to be more careful. I mean, you're really sloppy about this. You've got to be more careful. I think you ought to carry a tape recorder around with you and really look around you all the time as you're walking down the street to make sure nobody's recording you. And you know, just as a permanent record of what's going on, you should talk into the tape recorder and notice all the people around you that look suspicious to you and that you think might be part of the plot." And he just amplified it. He said, "You know, do it more. You're really doing a sloppy job. You've got to do it more thoroughly." And supposedly the guy came in a week later and he says, "I can't live this way." And that again was an opening to then, well, let's try this. Let's try something different. You have something?
Yeah, that's kind of an ecology issue. You have to know very well when and with whom to do that, because he might not be in a week later, but have done whatever because he can't stand it anymore. So that's kind of taking.
It's always a possibility. Yeah. That's a good point.
I have worked with people like this, and I would not go there.
What kind of thing do you think would happen?
Some of them already carry ideas of suicide with them. Or heavy substance abuse, or whatever. Some of them go into borderline behaviors and start hurting themselves. So if you do that, you would need, I guess, a controlled environment like a stationary caretaker
Institution or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
To really monitor
Yeah.
people.
All right. I'm more interested in mechanism and how things work and opening up possibilities of what you can do, but I think that's a good larger frame way of looking at this thing and considering the larger ramifications. Sure. Okay, anything else on paranoia? This is one of the things I just sort of fell into. I wasn't intending to model paranoia or multiple personality, but by taking this ideas about how our normal functioning works in terms of self-concept, I suddenly sort of stumbled on it and go, ooh, I bet this is how this works. And I'm quite sure about paranoia. I'm not at all sure about multiple personality. That one's been a great puzzle for over 100 years. And if I get time someday, or if someone just comes on my doorstep, if you know any multiples, send them down. Both of them. Okay, let's take a little break, about 10 minutes, and then we'll shift gears and become more metaphoric.